If you ever hear someone knocking during a hurricane, don't open the door unless you are ready for your life to stop belonging only to you. That was what Noah Whitaker thought later, after the rain, after the lighthouse, after Ethan Caldwell walked back into the parts of his heart he had spent years carefully locking away. But on that Friday night, with the Atlantic throwing itself against the rocks below and the old keeper's house shaking like it had bones, Noah was not thinking about fate. He was thinking about paper. Specifically, the 32 watercolor pages of his first children's book, now sitting in a cardboard portfolio on the kitchen table while rainwater crept under the warped back door in shining little rivers. The power had gone out 20 minutes earlier. His phone battery was at 3%. The road into Cape Mercy was probably under 2 feet of water by now, and the only message that had made it through before the signal died was from his older brother, Mason. Stay inside. Don't open the door for anyone. Typical Mason, Noah thought, trying to wedge a rolled towel against the leak. Even in a storm, his brother could make concern sound like a command. Noah loved him for it, and resented him for it, sometimes in the same breath. At 26, he had his own apartment above a bait shop, his own freelance clients, and a dream he had nearly convinced himself was real. But to Mason, he was still the kid who cried during thunder and hid under the kitchen table with crayons in both hands. A violent gust slammed into the house, rattling every window. Noah flinched, knocking over a jar of brushes. Blue-tinted water spread across the table, racing toward the corner of a painted page where a tiny lighthouse stood beneath a gold moon. No, 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 he whispered, lunging for it. Then came the knock. 3 hard pounds against the front door. Noah froze. The sound came again, louder this time, swallowed almost instantly by thunder. His heart climbed into his throat. Nobody should have been out there. Nobody sane, anyway. He grabbed the nearest thing he could find, an old brass candlestick, and moved toward the door. "Who is it?" he called, his voice thinner than he wanted. A familiar voice answered through the storm, low, breathless, and impossible. "Noah, it's Ethan. Open the door." Noah stared at the door as if the wood itself had learned how to speak. Ethan Caldwell was the last person he expected, and maybe the only person whose voice could have made him lower the candlestick. He slid the bolt back with shaking fingers, and the storm pushed the door inward before he could fully open it. Ethan stepped inside with rain dripping from his dark hair, his navy jacket soaked through, and one hand pressed around his other palm like he was trying to hide the fact that he was bleeding. "Close it," Ethan said, not sharply, just urgently, and Noah leaned his shoulder into the door until the latch caught again. For a second, they simply stood there, surrounded by the smell of rain, salt, old wood, and blown-out candles. Ethan was taller than Noah remembered, or maybe the small hallway made him seem that way. At 29, he had the calm, solid presence of someone who could walk into a collapsing room and start measuring the walls before anyone else finished panicking. He had been Mason's best friend since high school, the boy who fixed their porch steps without being asked, the young man who came to Thanksgiving every year and always helped wash dishes. The almost family guest Noah had taught himself not to look at for too long. "What are you doing here?" Noah asked. "The East Access Road is flooding," Ethan said, peeling off his wet jacket. "Mason called me before the signal dropped. He said you were out here alone." "Of course he did." Noah let out a tired laugh that had no humor in it. "He sent you to babysit me?" Ethan looked at him then, really looked, and something in his expression softened. "He sent me to check the foundation. I came because I knew you would be more worried about your drawings than yourself." Noah opened his mouth to argue, but a fat drop of blue water fell from the table behind him, landing on the floor with a tiny splash that betrayed him completely. Ethan's eyes moved past him. "See, that is not fair," Noah muttered. "It is a little fair." Another gust shook the windows. Noah hurried back to the kitchen, and Ethan followed without waiting to be invited. The room looked worse with 2 people in it, as if the storm had become embarrassed and started showing off. Towels were everywhere. A mixing bowl caught water under the ceiling leak. A flashlight lay on its side, throwing a pale beam across Noah's half-finished paintings. Ethan picked up the portfolio with careful hands, not touching the painted surfaces, only the dry cardboard edges. "Where do you want these?" "Anywhere dry," which currently means nowhere. Ethan glanced around, then nodded toward the narrow staircase. "Upstairs bedroom. Higher shelves. Less draft." You know this house? Noah asked, surprised. I surveyed it last spring for the town council. The roof is rude, the plumbing is dramatic, but the bones are good. Despite himself, Noah smiled. You talk about buildings like they have personalities. They do. This one is stubborn and lonely. Noah looked away too quickly, because that sounded uncomfortably familiar. Together they carried the artwork upstairs, moving slowly through the dim hall while thunder rolled over the sea. In the bedroom, Ethan cleared a shelf of dusty sailing magazines and placed each page flat, weighing the corners with books. He did it with a patience that made Noah's chest ache for reasons he did not want to name. When they returned to the kitchen, Noah finally noticed Ethan's hand again. A thin red line crossed his palm, not serious, but messy from the rain. You are hurt, Noah said. Ethan glanced down as if he had forgotten. A branch came down near the gate. I moved it. With your bare hands? It seemed faster at the time. That is the most alpha sentence I have ever heard. Ethan blinked, then laughed under his breath, low and surprised, and the sound warmed the cold kitchen more than the dead heater ever could. Noah found the first aid kit under the sink and pointed to a chair. Sit down before you decide to wrestle the chimney next. Yes, sir, Ethan said and sat. Noah took his hand carefully. The skin was cold from the rain, but his palm was broad and steady beneath Noah's fingers. For a moment, the storm outside faded into the small sounds. Between them, the peel of a bandage wrapper, the soft creak of the chair, Ethan breathing evenly while Noah cleaned the cut. You still hate thunder? Ethan asked quietly. Noah kept his eyes on the bandage. I do not hate it. I respect it from a distance. You used to hide under the kitchen table. I was 8. You were 16 the last time. Noah looked up, offended. That was a power outage, and I was looking for the dog. Ethan's mouth curved. The Whitakers did not have a dog. Noah tried not to smile, failed, and wrapped the bandage a little too tightly. Ethan winced just enough for Noah to notice. Sorry. It is fine. No, it is not. I am apparently dangerous with medical supplies. I will survive. Their eyes met, and the joke thinned into something quieter. Rain tapped hard against the glass. Somewhere behind the wall, the old house groaned, tired but holding. Noah released Ethan's hand first and reached for the kettle, needing something ordinary to do before the moment became too honest. Tea, he asked. Ethan looked at the dark stove, the leaking ceiling, the towels on the floor, and the flashlight slowly rolling toward a puddle. Do you have a working burner? Maybe. That is not an answer. It is a hopeful statement. This time, Ethan smiled fully, and Noah felt the dangerous, gentle shift of the night begin. The hopeful statement turned out to be only half true. The front burner worked if Noah held the knob at a certain angle, and Ethan struck the match on the third try, which made the whole process feel less like making tea and more like negotiating with a tiny dragon. Noah stood beside him with a flashlight tucked under his chin, trying not to laugh as Ethan crouched in front of the old stove with the seriousness of a man defusing a bomb. You restore 100-year-old houses for a living, Noah said. I feel like this should be easy for you. Ethan did not look away from the flame. Houses are honest. Appliances lie. The kettle finally began to warm, and Noah's laugh escaped before he could stop it. It sounded too bright in the dark kitchen, too comfortable, like something that belonged to a different life. Ethan looked up at him. Then, and the softness in his face made Noah suddenly aware of the small space between them, the rain shining on the windows, the bandage around Ethan's hand, and the fact that Mason was not there to stand between them with a joke and a warning. Noah turned quickly and reached for 2 chipped mugs hanging from hooks near the sink. One had a faded lobster on it. The other said, "Best dad ever," which made Ethan raise one eyebrow. Do not ask, Noah said. I bought it at a yard sale for 25 cents. I was not judging. Your face was judging. My face was curious. Your face has always been too quiet. People have to guess what it means. Ethan accepted the lobster mug and leaned back against the counter. What did you guess? Noah's fingers paused on the tea bag string. Outside, thunder moved farther away for a moment, leaving the house in a hollow, dripping silence. When I was younger, he asked, I guessed you were bored with all of us. Ethan's expression shifted, not hurt exactly, but surprised enough that Noah wished he had chosen a safer answer. Bored. You were always calm. Mason would be loud. Mom would be feeding everyone. Dad would be asking about school, and you would just sit there like you were visiting from another planet. Ethan looked down into his mug. I was trying very hard not to want to stay. Noah's chest tightened. It was the first time Ethan had said anything that sounded like a door opening. Before he could respond, a sharp scraping sound came from the corner of the kitchen. Noah jumped so hard the flashlight slipped from his hand and rolled under the table. Ethan straightened instantly. Another scrape. Then a tiny gray crab emerged from behind a stack of firewood, moving sideways with the confidence of a homeowner. Noah stared at it. The crab stared back, as much as a crab could stare. Absolutely not, Noah said. Ethan blinked. It is just a crab. It is inside the house. That makes it a criminal. I will handle it. Ethan took one step forward, and from the ceiling above him, a small black spider dropped on a nearly invisible thread, landing on his shoulder. Ethan froze. Completely. Noah looked from Ethan to the spider, then slowly covered his mouth. Are you afraid of spiders? No, you have not moved in 10 seconds. I am respecting its space. Noah laughed so hard he had to grab the table. Ethan closed his eyes as if asking the universe for privacy, while Noah took a postcard from the counter and gently guided the spider onto it. There, Noah said, carrying it to the cracked kitchen window and letting it outside. Your dignity is safe. It was never in danger. Of course not. The crab still needs to leave. You are on crab duty, brave restoration man. Between the two of them, one broom and a soup pot, they managed to escort the crab back onto the covered porch. By the time they closed the door, both of them were laughing, breathless in the kind of way that made the cold house feel warmer. Noah had forgotten, for a few impossible minutes, to be careful. Then Ethan reached into the pocket of his damp jacket for his phone and pulled out his wallet by mistake. A folded piece of paper slipped free and landed near Noah's foot. Noah bent to pick it up before Ethan could stop him. The paper was soft at the creases, worn from years of being opened and closed. On one side was a pencil drawing of the Cape Mercy lighthouse, uneven but tender, with a small note written in Noah's teenage handwriting along the bottom. Old things are not broken. They are just waiting for someone patient enough to understand them. Noah knew that drawing. He had made it when he was 17 and left it on the Whitaker kitchen counter after one of Mason's summer bonfires. He had thought it was thrown away. Slowly, he looked up. Ethan was watching him with a guarded expression Noah had never seen on him before. You kept this? Noah asked quietly. Ethan took a breath, and for once, the calm man looked uncertain. Yes. Why? The kettle began to whistle behind them, thin and trembling. Ethan did not move to turn it off, because that was the first kind thing anyone had said about something broken when I still thought I was one. For a moment, the whistling kettle was the only thing brave enough to speak. Noah stood with the folded drawing in his hand, rainwater tapping against the windows like impatient fingers, and felt the whole shape of Ethan Caldwell change in front of him. He had spent years thinking of Ethan as Mason's steady shadow, the quiet alpha who showed up for cookouts, fixed loose cabinet doors, and disappeared before anyone could ask him how he was doing. But now, in the yellow cone of flashlight glow, with his wet hair falling over his forehead and his guarded eyes fixed on a piece of paper from Noah's awkward teenage years, Ethan looked less like a man made of stone and more like someone who had spent a long time pretending not to need shelter. Noah turned off the burner before the kettle could scream itself empty. I did not know you felt that way, he said. Ethan took the drawing carefully, but he did not put it away. You were 17. You were not supposed to know. Mason knew. Some of it. Ethan's thumb moved over the crease in the paper. My dad died that spring. My mom had already moved to Arizona with her new husband. I was finishing community college, working nights, and sleeping in my truck more often than I admitted. Mason found out and started dragging me home for dinner. Noah remembered that summer in pieces. Mason suddenly bringing Ethan around almost every evening, their mother making too much pasta, their father pretending not to notice when Ethan packed leftovers, Noah sketching at the table while pretending not to listen. I thought you came over because Mason was your friend. He was, Ethan said. He still is. But your family was also the first place where nobody made me feel like a problem that needed solving. Noah's throat tightened. He wanted to say something perfect, something mature and gentle, but all he managed was, and my drawing helped? Ethan looked at him then, and his smile was small enough to hurt. More than you probably meant it to. The house gave a deep creak, and a gust pushed rain against the west windows so hard it sounded like thrown gravel. Noah startled, and Ethan noticed but did not tease him this time. Instead, he reached for the tea and poured hot water into both mugs like they had done this every storm of their lives. "Come on," he said. "The interior wall by the pantry will be warmer." They sat on the floor with their backs against the old plaster, knees bent, mugs in hand, a flashlight between them. The storm kept moving around the house, but inside their little circle, the world grew strangely calm. Ethan told Noah about the first house he ever restored, a crooked blue cottage in Rockport that had raccoons in the attic and a front porch slanted so badly every marble rolled toward the ocean. Noah told him about the New York publisher who had called his lighthouse illustrations charming but too quiet, which was publishing language for not exciting enough to sell. Ethan frowned at that. Quiet is not the same as empty. Noah looked into his tea. Try explaining that to people who want every book to sparkle like a cereal commercial. Your work does not need to shout. You have not seen enough of it to know that. I have seen enough of you. The words landed softly, but they landed. Noah turned his face toward him. Ethan seemed to realize what he had said a second too late, because he looked away and took a careful drink from the ridiculous lobster mug. The old Noah would have made a joke. The younger Noah would have blushed himself silent. This Noah, cold and tired and brave only because the storm had left no room for pretending, asked, "What do you see?" Ethan was quiet for a long time. "Someone who notices what other people throw away," he said. "Someone who makes lonely things feel worth keeping." Noah forgot how to breathe for a second. Then the ceiling chose that exact moment to drip directly into Ethan's mug with a tiny, offensive plop. They both stared at it. Noah pressed his lips together. Ethan looked personally betrayed by the roof. Then Noah started laughing, and Ethan followed, the sound low and warm and helpless. By midnight, they had built a small fortress of towels around the worst leaks, moved the art upstairs, and found a battery radio that only picked up weather updates and one oldies station from Portland. Ethan insisted the storm would pass by morning. Noah accused him of sounding like a local news anchor. Ethan accused Noah of having no respect for practical information. Sometime after 1 in the morning, when the wind softened from a roar to a tired sigh, Noah fell asleep sitting up, his shoulder resting against the wall. He woke only once, just enough to feel something warm settle over him. Ethan's dry sweater, smelling faintly of cedar, rain, and sawdust. Noah should have moved. He should have handed it back. Instead, he closed his eyes and let himself be warm. At dawn, pale light slipped into the kitchen, turning the wet floor silver. The storm had passed, leaving the world outside washed clean and strangely quiet. Noah woke to the sound of tires on gravel. Ethan was already standing by the window, his expression unreadable. A red pickup truck stopped near the porch. Mason stepped out, shoulders tense, eyes scanning the damaged house until they landed on Ethan inside the kitchen, then on Noah wrapped in Ethan's sweater. The silence that followed was worse than thunder. Mason did not knock. He opened the front door with the kind of force only an older brother could make look like concern, stepping into the keeper's house with rain boots, a windbreaker, and a face that said he had already reached the wrong conclusion and was prepared to defend it in court. "Noah," he said first, eyes moving over the towels, the buckets, the damp floor, then stopping again on the sweater around Noah's shoulders. "Are you okay?" Noah stood too quickly, nearly tripping over the edge of a towel fortress. "I am fine." Mason's gaze shifted to Ethan. "You were here all night?" Ethan did not flinch, which somehow made the room feel smaller. The road flooded. The west windows were taking water. His artwork needed to be moved upstairs. "That is not what I asked." Noah felt heat rise in his face. "Mason." "What?" Mason looked back at him, voice sharp with worry pretending to be anger. "I told you to stay inside and not open the door." "You also called Ethan." "I called him to check the property, not to spend the night wearing out your kitchen floor." "The storm spent the night wearing out the kitchen floor," Noah said, then immediately hated how defensive he sounded. Ethan stepped forward, calm and careful. "Nothing happened, Mason." The sentence was meant to help, but it landed badly. Noah saw Mason's jaw tighten and felt something in himself tighten too, because nothing happened was true and also not true at all. Nothing had happened that needed an apology. Nothing had happened that could be explained in one clean sentence. But something had changed. Noah had seen a part of Ethan he could not unsee, and Ethan had looked at him as if he was not someone's kid brother, not a fragile omega to be managed, but a person whose quiet mattered. Mason rubbed both hands over his face. The bridge is open enough for one lane. I am taking Noah home. I can drive myself, Noah said. Your car is behind 3 fallen branches. Then I can wait. Noah. His name came out with that familiar weight, the old family tone that had guided him away from broken glass, bad weather, disappointing people, and sometimes his own choices. He wanted to argue, but he was tired, hungry, and still wrapped in Ethan's sweater like evidence. Ethan looked at Noah, not Mason. You should go home, get warm, and check your pages once they are dry. The practical kindness of it hurt more than if he had asked him to stay. Noah handed the sweater back, careful not to touch Ethan's fingers. Thank you, he said. Ethan accepted it, his expression unreadable again. Anytime. The drive back to town was quiet except for Mason's windshield wipers pushing aside the last week rain. Cape Mercy looked bruised but alive. Lawns were scattered with pine branches. Mailboxes leaned at strange angles. The marina parking lot held a shallow lake where gulls stood like confused tourists. Noah watched it all from the passenger seat, his portfolio buckled safely in the back like a child. You scared me, Mason said finally. Noah stared out the window. The storm scared me too. That is not what I mean. I know what you mean. Mason sighed. Ethan is my best friend. I am aware. He is also complicated. Noah turned then. Everyone is complicated. Mason's hands tightened on the steering wheel. You do not know him the way I do. Maybe not. But maybe you do not know me the way you think you do. That made Mason go quiet, and for once, Noah did not rush to soften the sentence. By noon, he was back in his apartment above the bait shop, surrounded by the comforting smell of coffee, salt, and old wood. His pages were safe, mostly. One had a water stain blooming across the corner where the painted sea met the sky, but as Noah studied it, he realized it looked less like damage and more like morning fog. He left it. 3 days later, the town council announced an emergency restoration project for the lighthouse property. The storm had made the damage impossible to ignore, and suddenly Cape Mercy wanted its oldest landmark saved before tourist season. Noah received an email asking if he would paint a small mural for the future children's reading room inside the keeper's house. Ethan's name appeared 2 lines below as the lead restoration contractor. Noah read the email 3 times, each time feeling more ridiculous and more awake. Their first official workday was bright, windy, and cold enough that everyone wore fleece even though it was technically spring. Ethan arrived with measuring tools, rolled blueprints, and a paper tray holding 2 coffees from Harbor Bean. He set one beside Noah's sketchbook without ceremony. Oat milk, cinnamon, no whipped cream, he said. Noah looked at the cup, then at him. You remember that? Ethan shrugged. You ordered it every Thanksgiving after pretending you liked black coffee. Noah tried to think of something clever, but from under the porch came a tiny, offended meow. Both of them looked down. A skinny gray cat with one white paw stared out at them like it had inherited the property and disapproved of the staff. Noah crouched immediately. Oh, hello. Ethan sighed. No, you do not even know what I was going to say. You were going to name it. Captain Pancake, Noah said. Ethan closed his eyes. That is a terrible name. The cat walked directly to Ethan's boot, sat on it, and meowed again. Noah smiled. He disagrees. Ethan looked down at the cat, then at Noah, then reluctantly opened the coffee carrier and tore off a small piece of the cardboard tray to use as a temporary dish for water. It was such a small thing. So ordinary. So exactly the kind of thing Noah was beginning to fear he could love. The restoration settled into a rhythm so gentle that Noah almost forgot it was dangerous. Every morning, he walked the half-mile from his apartment to the harbor, bought coffee at Harbor Bean, then drove the winding road to the lighthouse with his sketchbook, paint samples, and a growing bag of cat treats for Captain Pancake, who had somehow become the unofficial site manager. Ethan was always there before him, sleeves rolled to his forearms, pencil tucked behind one ear, studying old beams as if they were letters from someone he missed. He never crowded Noah. He never flirted in a way Mason could accuse. He simply noticed. When the morning sun hit the east wall too brightly, Ethan hung a canvas tarp so Noah could see his colors better. When Noah forgot lunch, Ethan left half a turkey sandwich wrapped in wax paper beside the paint cans without saying a word. When Captain Pancake stepped directly through a tray of pale blue paint, and left tiny paw prints across the drop cloth. Ethan looked at the mess for a full 5 seconds before saying, "He has entered his abstract period." Noah laughed so hard he got yellow paint on his chin, and Ethan reached toward him with a clean rag, then stopped just before touching him. That tiny paw stayed with Noah for the rest of the day. By the second week, the children's reading room began to look like a place from a dream. Noah painted rolling waves along the lower walls, soft enough to feel safe, with little boats, bright buoys, and sea birds carrying ribbons of light. In the corner, he painted the lighthouse itself, not perfect and shining, but weathered, kind, and stubborn, standing with its lamp turned toward a small boat finding its way home. Ethan built low bookshelves beneath the windows, repaired the old floorboards, and carved a wooden sill wide enough for children to sit on with picture books in their laps. Sometimes they worked in companionable silence. Sometimes they argued about deeply unimportant things, like whether blueberry pie was better warm or cold, whether a person could trust anyone who called soda pop, and whether Captain Pancake deserved a tiny bandana. Noah said yes. Ethan said absolutely not. The next morning, the cat arrived wearing a red bandana, and Ethan claimed he had no idea how it happened. The almost happy days made the evening it changed feel even quieter. Rain had returned, not a storm this time, only a steady spring drizzle that blurred the windows and turned the sea the color of slate. The volunteers had gone home. Mason had stopped by earlier with donuts, stayed just long enough to watch Ethan and Noah laugh over a crooked shelf, then left with a face Noah could not read. By 7 o'clock, only Noah and Ethan remained in the reading room. Noah was sitting cross-legged on the floor, finishing the final gold line around the painted lighthouse beam. Ethan worked nearby, sanding the edge of the window seat with slow, even strokes. The radio played an old song from somewhere near Portland. Captain Pancake slept in a cardboard box labeled fragile, which Noah considered accurate. "Done," Noah said at last, leaning back to look at the mural. Ethan stood behind him. For a long moment, he said nothing. Noah's nerves fluttered. "That bad?" "No," Ethan said softly. "That good." The words were simple, but the way he said them made Noah's hands go still. He looked up and found Ethan watching the wall with an expression so open it felt private. "It looks like somewhere a kid would want to stay," Ethan added. "Somewhere safe." Noah swallowed. "That was the idea. You are good at making places feel safe." Noah stood, brushing dust from his jeans, suddenly too aware of the quiet room, the rain, the smell of sawdust and paint, and Ethan standing close enough that Noah could see the tiny flecks of green in his gray eyes. "So are you," Noah said. Ethan looked at him then. Neither of them moved. The space between them became very small, full of all the things they had not said since the storm. Ethan lifted his hand slowly, giving Noah every chance to step away, and gently wiped the yellow paint from Noah's chin with his thumb. It was nothing. It was everything. Noah's breath caught. Ethan's gaze dropped for half a second, then returned to his eyes, careful and asking. Noah leaned closer, not because he was swept away, but because for once he knew exactly what he wanted. Ethan leaned, too, just enough that the world narrowed to rain on glass and the warm steadiness of his presence. Then Ethan stopped. His hand fell away. He took one step back, and the loss of warmth felt like a door closing. "Noah," he said, voice rough with restraint. "You are Mason's little brother." Noah stared at him, the words cutting deeper because they were familiar, because they were the same fence everyone had placed around his life. He nodded once, slowly, though his throat burned. "That is the problem," he said. Ethan's face tightened. "I mean that I cannot betray him. And I mean everyone says that before they say my name." Ethan looked stricken, but Noah did not take it back. "I am not asking you to betray Mason. I am asking you to see me without asking his permission first." The rain kept falling. Captain Pancake stirred in his box and gave a sleepy chirp, completely unaware that the room had cracked open. Ethan looked at Noah as if he wanted to cross the distance and did not trust himself to deserve it. "You matter too much to risk hurting," he said. Noah picked up his brush with hands that only shook a little. "Then stop deciding for me what pain I can survive." Noah did not cry until he got home, which felt like a small victory and a ridiculous one. He made it through the rest of the evening with his brush in his hand and his spine held straight, finishing the gold edge of the lighthouse beam while Ethan packed his tools in careful silence. They said good night like co-workers, polite and distant, as if the room had not nearly become the place where everything changed. Outside, the drizzle followed Noah all the way back to his apartment above the bait shop, silvering the windshield, blurring the harbor lights into soft, trembling stars. Only when he locked his door behind him, set his keys in the chipped ceramic bowl, and saw a tiny blue paw print Captain Pancake had somehow left on the cuff of his jeans did the tears come. They were not dramatic tears. They were quiet, tired, annoyed tears, the kind that made him angry because they did not solve anything. He sat on the kitchen floor with his back against the cabinet and let himself feel all of it. The almost kiss, the step back, the old words, the way Ethan had looked at him like he was precious and then treated him like he was breakable. The next morning, Noah arrived at the lighthouse early, determined to be professional, which lasted exactly 12 minutes before Mason's red pickup rolled up behind Ethan's truck. Mason stepped out with 2 coffees and a paper bag from Harbor Bean, wearing the careful expression of a man pretending he had not come to start a conversation. Ethan was on the porch, checking the railing brackets. Noah was inside the reading room, close enough to hear through the open window, far enough to know neither of them realized it. "We need to talk," Mason said. Ethan set down his measuring tape. "I figured. Do you have feelings for my brother?" The question landed without warning. Noah went still, paintbrush hovering over a white cloud. Ethan did not answer quickly. That hurt and helped at the same time. "Yes," he said finally. Mason let out a breath that sounded like he had been carrying it since the morning after the storm. "How long?" "Long enough to know I should have stayed away." "That is not comforting." "It was not meant to be." Mason's voice lowered. "Ethan, he is Noah. He trusts people with his whole heart, and then pretends he does not bleed when they disappoint him." Noah closed his eyes. There it was again, love shaped like a glass box. "I know," Ethan said quietly. "No, you know the version you see when he is trying to be brave. I know the kid who shook during thunderstorms. I know the teenager who stopped entering art contests because one teacher said his work was too soft. I know how long it took him to believe he could want something for himself." "So do I," Ethan said, and for the first time, there was an edge in his calm. "That is why I stepped back." "You stepped back because it was easier than asking what he wanted." Silence. Noah felt the words move through him like the first clean breath after being underwater. Mason continued, rougher now. "Do you think I do not know I overdo it? I know. I hear myself sometimes, and I sound like dad on a bad day. But when you spend your whole life protecting someone, you do not. Always notice when your arms become another wall." Ethan said nothing. Noah set down his brush and walked out before fear could talk him out of it. Both men turned when he stepped onto the porch. Mason's face changed first, guilt flashing across it. "Noah." "No," Noah said, voice unsteady but clear. "I need both of you to listen." The sea was calm behind them, gray and wide, gulls calling over the rocks. Noah looked at his brother first. "I love you. I know you worry because you raised half of me when mom was working double shifts and dad was sick. I know you think protection is the same as love because sometimes it was. But I am 26 years old. You do not get to turn every person who might hurt me into a locked door." Mason's mouth tightened, but he did not interrupt. Noah turned to Ethan next, and that was harder. "And you. You do not get to call distance kindness when it is really fear wearing a nicer coat." Ethan looked down, then back up, accepting the hit. "You are right." The simple admission nearly broke Noah's composure, but he kept going. "I am not asking either of you to promise I will never get hurt. I am asking you to trust me enough to let my life belong to me." For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Captain Pancake chose that exact time to climb onto the porch railing, knock Mason's coffee over with one elegant swipe of his tail, and meow as if demanding applause. Mason stared at the spilled coffee. Ethan looked away, clearly fighting a smile. Noah laughed first, helpless and wet-eyed, and somehow that made Mason laugh too. The tension did not vanish, but it loosened. Mason sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "That cat is a menace." "He is emotionally gifted," Noah said. Ethan's mouth curved softly, but his eyes stayed serious on Noah. "I am sorry," he said, "for deciding for you." Noah nodded. "Thank you." It was not a grand resolution. Mason did not suddenly become relaxed. Ethan did not suddenly step forward and take Noah's hand. But something important had shifted. The walls were still there, maybe, but now they had doors. For the next few days, peace came carefully, like a shy animal learning the shape of an open hand. Mason still stopped by the lighthouse too often, usually with coffee or sandwiches or a toolbox he did not actually need, but he no longer watched Ethan like a warning sign. Ethan still kept a respectful distance from Noah, but now the distance felt chosen together, not imposed from above. They worked, they talked, they let the silence breathe. The reading room was finished first. When the last coat of sealant dried over the mural, Noah stood in the doorway and felt something inside him settle. The painted lighthouse glowed in soft gold, its beams stretching across waves, boats, clouds, and a tiny gray cat hidden near the rocks because Captain Pancake had earned his place in history. Children from the elementary school came to see it before the official opening, their sneakers squeaking on the restored floorboards, their fingers pointing at every little detail. One girl with braids asked why the lighthouse looked a little crooked. Noah crouched beside her and said, "Because it has been through weather, and it is still standing." She nodded with the seriousness of a judge and told him that was better than perfect. Noah carried those words home like a gift. At night, he worked on the final pages of his book until his eyes burned and his fingers smelled like watercolor paint. The water stain from the storm stayed in the corner of one illustration, softened into fog around the sea. Instead of hiding it, Noah built the ending around it. His little lighthouse was not saved from the storm. It was changed by it. The rocks were rearranged. The paint on the door was chipped. The garden fence leaned. But in the morning, when the clouds opened, the lighthouse discovered that the damage had made space for wildflowers to grow. 2 weeks later, the town library hosted Noah's first public reading. It was a small event, just folding chairs, paper cups of lemonade, a plate of cookies from Harbor Bean, and a handmade poster that Mason had hung slightly crooked on the front desk. To Noah, it felt like Carnegie Hall. His mother sat in the first row with tissues already in her hand. Mason leaned against the back wall, arms crossed, pretending not to be emotional. Ethan was not there. He had left 3 days earlier for a restoration assessment in Vermont, a 4-week project with an old and damaged by winter ice. He had told Noah in person, standing on the lighthouse porch at sunset. It was scheduled before all of this, Ethan had said. Noah had nodded, because he believed him, and because believing someone did not make absence easier. "You should go," Noah had replied. "It is your work." Ethan had looked like he wanted to say more, but in the end he only said, "I am proud of you." Now, standing at the front of the library, Noah opened his book with hands that trembled only a little. He read about the storm, the dark windows, the frightened little boat, and the old lighthouse that thought its only purpose was to guide everyone else home. He read about the morning after, when the lighthouse finally understood that its light also meant, "I am here. I survived. I am allowed to be seen." By the final page, the room was quiet in that rare way a room becomes quiet when people are not bored, but listening with their whole hearts. Noah looked up and saw Mason wiping one eye with the heel of his hand. Their mother was crying openly. The little girl with braids whispered, "I like the crooked part." Noah smiled, and for the first time in years, he did not wish his work were louder. After the reading, while neighbors lined up to buy signed copies, Mason slipped outside with his phone. He stood under the library awning, looking down Main Street toward the harbor, where the evening fog was starting to roll in. When Ethan answered, Mason did not bother with hello. "You should have been here," he said. There was a pause. "I know." Mason swallowed, watching Noah through the window as he bent to sign a book for a child. "No, I do not think you do. He did not need you here to shine. That is the part one finally understand. But if you love him, and you are staying away because you think it is noble, then you are about to miss the best person I know." Ethan was silent for so long Mason thought the call had dropped. Then Ethan said, very quietly, "I am already on the road." Mason looked toward the fog, toward the lighthouse road beyond town, and smiled despite himself. "Good. And Caldwell?" "Yes. If you make him drink black coffee, I will never forgive you." By the time Noah finished signing the last book, the library windows had turned black with evening, reflecting the small golden room back at him like a memory he could keep. His cheeks hurt from smiling. His hand ached from writing his name. His mother had kissed his forehead in front of half the town, which would have embarrassed him if he had not been too happy to care. Mason helped stack the leftover chairs without making a single protective comment. Though he did steal 3 cookies for the road, and claimed it was payment for emotional labor. When Noah finally stepped outside, the air smelled like fog, wet pavement, and the ocean waiting beyond the houses. "You need a ride?" Mason asked, jingling his keys. Noah looked toward the end of Main Street, where the lighthouse road disappeared into silver mist. "I think I want to walk." Mason studied him for a second, then nodded. "Text me when you get home." Noah raised an eyebrow. Mason sighed. "Text me when you feel like it." "Better." Mason pulled him into a quick hug, warm and familiar. "I am proud of you, little brother." Noah hugged him back. "I know." Then, after a beat, Mason added, "And I am trying." Noah smiled against his shoulder. "I know that too." He walked slowly through Cape Mercy, carrying one copy of his book beneath his jacket to protect it from the damp air. The town was quiet, porch lights glowing on weathered houses, the harbor bells chiming softly in the fog. Instead of going home, his feet took him to the lighthouse. The restored keeper's house stood above the rocks with warm light in the windows, no longer abandoned, no longer waiting. Noah opened the door and found the reading room peaceful and empty, the mural glowing beneath the soft lamps. On the window seat sat a paper cup from Harbor Bean, still warm. Oat milk, cinnamon, no whipped cream. Beside it was a small wooden sign, hand-carved and polished smooth. Whitaker Light Studio. Noah touched the letters with his fingertips, and his breath caught. "I almost wrote Noah's studio," Ethan said from the doorway. Noah turned. Ethan stood there in a gray sweater, travel-tired, hair windblown, looking less like someone arriving with answers and more like someone brave enough to arrive without them. "But this place was yours before it had a name." Noah held the sign against his chest. "You drove back from Vermont?" Mason called. "Of course he did. I was already thinking about it." Ethan stepped inside, slowly, giving Noah all the space in the world. "I should have stayed for the reading." "Yes," Noah said, because he was done making hard truths softer than they needed to be. Ethan nodded. "I left because I thought distance was kindness. I was wrong. Kindness should have asked what you wanted." The room went quiet around them, filled with painted waves, sleeping bookshelves, and the soft scratch of Captain Pancake appearing from under the window seat, like a very small landlord inspecting a tenant. Noah looked at Ethan, really looked at him, at the man who had once kept a teenage drawing because it helped him survive, the man who fixed broken houses but was still learning how to stand inside his own feelings. "And what do you want?" Noah asked. Ethan's answer came without rush, without performance. "I want to know you as Noah, not Mason's brother, not someone I have to protect from every possible hurt. Just you. The artist who argues with stoves, adopts criminal cats, and makes crooked things feel beautiful." Noah tried not to smile and failed. Captain Pancake is not a criminal. Right on cue, the cat knocked a pencil off the window seat. Ethan looked at it. "The evidence suggests otherwise." Noah laughed, and the last tight place in his chest loosened. He set the wooden sign down, picked up the warm coffee, and handed it to Ethan. "This is mine. I know. You can have one sip because you drove several hours and looked terrible." Ethan accepted the cup with solemn gratitude. "Generous. Do not get used to it." They sat together on the window seat, shoulders close but not rushed, watching the lighthouse beams sweep across the dark water. Noah told Ethan about the little girl who liked the crooked part. Ethan told Noah about turning his truck around before Mason finished his second sentence. Later, Mason texted a single question mark, and Noah sent back a photo of the wooden sign, Ethan's coffee cup, and Captain Pancake sitting on Ethan's boot like a judge. Mason replied, "Be nice to my brother." Then a second message arrived. "Both of you." Noah smiled until his eyes blurred. Months later, when the keeper's house officially opened as a children's art studio and reading room, people would say the storm had saved it by forcing the town to notice what was falling apart. Noah would understand that better than anyone. Some storms did not arrive to destroy a life. Some came to shake the windows, flood the floors, ruin the old silence, and leave behind enough morning light to show what was still worth rebuilding. And every evening, when the studio lights glowed warm against the sea and Ethan worked beside him on the porch, Noah would look at the crooked lighthouse, the restless ocean, and the man who had finally learned to stay, and he would believe, with his whole heart, that changed things could still become home.